My stepmother hit me in front of 112 guests at the Thornbury Hall summer garden party, and the sound of her palm against my cheek was the loudest thing in the county. I know the exact number of guests because I had personally arranged every place setting, polished every champagne flute, and hand-cut every rose in every centerpiece on every linen-draped table on the south lawn. I had been awake since 4 in the morning, as I had been every morning for the past 5 years, because the woman who married my father and inherited everything I was supposed to be did not keep me as a stepdaughter. She kept me as staff. The slap echoed across the south lawn, over the roses my mother had planted 25 years ago, past the string quartet that had gone silent, and into the absolute, mortified stillness of 100 people who had just watched Lady Cordelia Ashworth strike her stepdaughter across the face at an event designed to impress the most eligible duke in England. I tasted copper. My left cheek burned. My vision swam with the hot, bright tears I had spent 5 years refusing to shed in front of her. Cordelia raised her hand again, and a hand that was not mine caught her wrist. It closed around her thin, jeweled arm with the quiet, devastating precision of a man who does not often intervene in other people's affairs because he has never needed to. The world generally arranges itself around his preferences without being asked. Sebastian Hale, the 8th Duke of Foxmere, 6'3", gray-green eyes, a jaw that looked like it had been designed by an architect with a very firm opinion about symmetry. He was not squeezing Cordelia's wrist. He did not need to. The grip itself was the message. He looked at my stepmother with an expression I will remember until I die, the cold, ancient, aristocratic fury of a man whose family has held land since the conquest and who has decided that the woman in front of him is not worthy of standing on it. And he said 5 words: "You will never touch her." To understand how a woman ends up being slapped by her stepmother at her own family's garden party, you need to understand the will. My father was Lord Edward Ashworth of Thornbury Hall, a kind, gentle, bookish man who loved 2 things in this world more than anything: his late wife's rose garden and his daughter. That daughter was me, Rosalind Ashworth, named after the roses. My mother, Lady Helena, died when I was 7. She was beautiful, plus size, with the same dark auburn curls and wide hips and warm laugh that I inherited. My father never remarried. He said there was no point. Helena had been the entire garden, and everything after her was just maintenance. Then he met Cordelia Blackwood. Cordelia was 43, twice divorced, thin as a blade, and surgically beautiful in the way that costs a great deal of money and removes all evidence of genuine emotion. She had a daughter from her first marriage, Philippa, blonde, delicate, and entirely empty behind the eyes, and a talent for making lonely, grieving men feel temporarily less alone. My father married her when I was 25. He died 2 years later. A heart attack in his study, surrounded by his books and his late wife's portrait. I found him. And then the will was read. The will, the one filed with the family solicitor, left everything to Cordelia: the house, the land, the accounts, the titles, associated properties, every painting, every book, every rose bush my mother had ever planted. Rosalind Ashworth, the only biological child of Lord Edward Ashworth, received nothing. I was 27 years old, plus size, grieving, and suddenly homeless in my own ancestral home. I should have fought it. I know that now. But grief does something to your spine. It softens it. And Cordelia, with the efficient cruelty of a woman who has been stripping men of their assets her entire adult life, moved fast. Within a month, she had dismissed the old staff, installed her own people, redecorated my mother's rooms, and offered me a choice. You can leave, Rosalind, with nothing, or you can stay and be useful. I stayed, because the roses were here, because my mother was in every petal of that garden, because I could not bear to lose the last place on earth where Helena Ashworth had left her fingerprints. I stayed, and I became the help. Cordelia did not simply make me work. She made me disappear. She gave me a uniform, a shapeless, oversized black dress that swallowed my curves and made me look like a shadow. She forbade me from eating at the family table. She moved me to the old servants' quarters on the third floor. She introduced me to guests as the housekeeper, or, when she was feeling particularly vicious, as poor Edward's unfortunate daughter. She takes after her mother's side, I'm afraid. Heavy. Sighed. She was systematic about it. She scheduled my work so I was never visible during social events. She confiscated the clothes my father had bought me, the beautiful dresses in deep rose and emerald that had been tailored to celebrate my body rather than apologize for it. She replaced them with black, always black, the color of erasure, and she weaponized my body against me every single day. You've gotten bigger again, Rosalind. It's embarrassing. No wonder your father left you nothing. He probably couldn't bear the thought of some fortune-hunting man marrying you for the estate and parading you around in public. Philippa has been asked to 3 balls this season. You've been asked to none, but then they don't make dance cards for women your size, do they? If you insist on eating that much, at least have the decency to do it where the guests can't see you. 5 years. 5 years of that voice chipping away at me like water on limestone. 5 years of waking up at 4, tending my mother's roses in the dark, serving breakfast to a woman who slept in my mother's bed, and wore my mother's jewels, and fed my inheritance to her vacant, bone-thin daughter. I am 32 years old. I am plus size, with wide hips and full breasts and soft arms, and a round, beautiful face that looks exactly like my mother's. I know I am beautiful. My father told me every day. My mother's portrait, the one Cordelia removed from the main hall and banished to the attic, shows me exactly where my beauty comes from. But 5 years of being told you are too large to be loved, too heavy to be wanted, too visible to be allowed in the room, 5 years of that will test even the strongest architecture. The one thing Cordelia could not take from me was the garden. She tried. In the first year, she hired a landscape architect to rip out the rose beds and replace them with a modern sculpture installation. The architect took one look at my mother's garden, a 1/4 acre of heritage roses, some dating back 150 years, including 3 varieties that existed nowhere else in England, and refused. He called it a national treasure. Cordelia called him something unprintable and never spoke of it again. So the roses stayed, and I tended them, every morning before dawn, every evening after the last dish was washed. I knelt in the soil my mother had turned with her own hands, and I pruned and fed and watered the only inheritance that could not be forged. The roses knew me. They leaned toward my hands. The deep crimson gallicas my mother had propagated from a single cutting bloomed every June with a fragrance that smelled like Helena's perfume. Old garden roses and warm skin, and the particular sweetness of a woman who was comfortable in her own magnificent body. I talked to the roses. I told them about my day, about Cordelia's cruelties, about the guests who walked past me without seeing me. I told them I was lonely. I told them I missed my father. I told them that sometimes, late at night, I stood in front of the small mirror in my servant's room and took off the shapeless black uniform and looked at my body, my real body, soft and curved and strong, and tried to remember what it felt like to believe I was beautiful. The roses never answered, but they bloomed, every year brighter and more abundant than the last, as though my mother was answering for them. The summer garden party was Cordelia's masterpiece. She had been engineering it for months, a lavish afternoon event on the south lawn of Thornbury Hall, designed with one singular obsessive purpose, to present her daughter Philippa to Sebastian Hale, the 8th Duke of Foxmere, and secure a proposal by autumn. The Duke of Foxmere was the most eligible man in England. Old title, vast estates, a fortune that predated the Industrial Revolution. He was 34, unmarried, and had a reputation for being impossible to impress. Every ambitious mother in the country had paraded their finest daughters past him. None had stuck. Cordelia was convinced that Philippa, blonde, thin, ornamental, and coached to within an inch of her life, would be the one. She had spent £40,000 on the garden party alone. She had imported champagne from a specific vineyard the Duke was rumored to favor. She had commissioned a string quartet to play his late mother's favorite Debussy. She had thought of everything. She had not thought of me. My job was to cut the roses for the centerpieces, set the tables, and vanish before the first guest arrived. I was to be nowhere near the south lawn during the event. If the Duke sees you lumbering around in that uniform, Cordelia had said that morning, her voice carrying the flat, practiced cruelty of 5 years of daily use, he'll think we employ circus animals. I cut the roses. I set the tables. I arranged every centerpiece with the care of a woman who knew each bloom by name and lineage. And then, because I had 20 minutes before the guests arrived and the south lawn became forbidden territory, I walked into the walled rose garden behind the east wing to check on my mother's gallicas. That is where the Duke of Foxmere found me. I was on my knees in the soil, my black uniform streaked with dirt, my auburn curls escaping their severe bun, my plump hands deep in the earth around a struggling gallica, when I heard footsteps on the gravel path behind me. "Those are Duc de Guiche roses," said a voice. Low, unhurried, the voice of a man who does not often need to speak above a murmur because the world leans in to listen. I haven't seen heritage gallicas like these since my grandmother's estate in Wiltshire. I looked up from the soil and saw a man who did not belong in the service garden. He was tall, absurdly, aristocratically tall, with dark hair and gray-green eyes that held the specific, assessing intelligence of someone who reads situations the way I read soil conditions. Navy suit, no tie, collar open. He was not conventionally handsome. He was architecturally handsome, as though his face had been designed by someone who believed that symmetry was a moral position. "You know your roses," I said, still kneeling, too surprised to remember that I was supposed to be invisible. My grandmother was obsessed. She had 17 varieties of heritage gallicas. She always said the Duc de Guiche was the most difficult, temperamental, refuses to bloom for anyone who doesn't love it. He tilted his head, studying me with an intensity that made my breath catch. "Yours are thriving. They were my mother's." And something shifted in his expression, a flicker of recognition. "Your mother. Would that be Lady Helena Ashworth?" I felt the ground tilt. No one had spoken my mother's name in this house in 5 years. Cordelia had removed her portraits, her books, her name from every conversation. Helena Ashworth had been erased as thoroughly as her daughter. "You knew my mother?" "My father did. They were friends. They corresponded about roses for years. Lord Ashworth and my father were close." He paused, his gray-green eyes steady on mine. "Which means you are Rosalind. Not the housekeeper. Not poor Edward's unfortunate daughter. Not the fat one." He said my name like it was the name of the person he had come here to find. "I thought you might be here," he said quietly. "I've been looking for you." Before I could ask what he meant, before I could process the devastating fact that a duke was standing in my mother's rose garden, telling me he had been looking for me. Cordelia's voice cut through the summer air like shears through a stem. "Rosalind." She was standing at the entrance to the walled garden, her cream suit immaculate, her face arranged in the specific expression she reserved for my public appearances, the tight, humiliated smile of a woman whose unacceptable stepdaughter has been caught existing in a visible location. "What on earth are you doing?" "I told you to finish the centerpieces and disappear. The Duke is expected any—" She saw him, standing on the gravel path, looking at me, looking at the fat servant girl in the shapeless black uniform with soil on her hands. I watched Cordelia's face perform 3 calculations in rapid succession. The first, "The Duke is already here." The second, "The Duke is in the rose garden, talking to the help." The third, and the one that turned her expression from shock to absolute incandescent fury. He is looking at her the way he was supposed to look at Philippa. "Your Grace," Cordelia said, switching to the honeyed, deferential voice she used for important people. "I am so sorry about this. The girl is part of the household staff. She should not be here. Rosalind, go, now." The Duke did not look at Cordelia. He was still looking at me. "Lady Cordelia," he said, his voice carrying the polite, lethal precision of a man who has been raised to weaponize courtesy. "I was just admiring the Gallica roses. Your stepdaughter tells me they were Lady Helena's." Stepdaughter. He had used the word deliberately, and Cordelia heard it land. "Rosalind is not. She is employed by the household in a domestic capacity. She is not. She is Lord Edward Ashworth's daughter," the Duke said quietly. "I am aware." Cordelia's eyes went very small, and very bright, and very dangerous. "Rosalind," she hissed, "inside. Now." I stood up. I brushed the soil from my knees. I walked past the Duke, past Cordelia, out of my mother's rose garden, and toward the south lawn, where the garden party was in full swing. But Cordelia was not finished. Because I had committed the one unforgivable crime in Cordelia's world, I had been seen by the one man she needed to not see me. She followed me onto the south lawn. It happened in full view of 112 guests. Cordelia caught my arm at the edge of the marquee, her manicured nails digging into the soft flesh above my elbow, and spun me around. The string quartet was between movements. The champagne conversation had lulled. The timing was accidentally, catastrophically perfect. "Do you have any idea," Cordelia said, her voice carrying across the silent lawn with the projection of a woman who has spent her life performing what you have just done. "I was tending the roses," I said, "as you instructed. You were flirting with the Duke of Foxmere, in your uniform, looking like that." She gestured at my body, at my wide hips and full breasts and soft arms, with the contemptuous flick of a hand dismissing something unsanitary. "Do you honestly believe a man like Sebastian Hale would look twice at a woman your size? You are an embarrassment to this family. You have always been an embarrassment. Your father left you nothing because even he knew, even Edward, who loved his fat daughter more than sense, knew that you would never be anything but a burden." Every guest heard it, 112 people, the county's aristocracy, the local gentry, 3 members of Parliament, and the string quartet from London heard Lady Cordelia Ashworth call her stepdaughter fat, call her a burden, and invoke her dead father's name to do it. And then she slapped me. The sound was sharp, obscene, final. My head snapped to the right, my vision whitened. The taste of copper bloomed on my tongue where my teeth cut the inside of my cheek. The garden party was silent. 100 people did nothing. Cordelia raised her hand again. His hand closed around her wrist 6 inches from my face. I did not see him move. One moment he was 20 feet away, rising from his seat at the head table. The next, he was standing between us, his tall frame blocking the afternoon sun, casting Cordelia into shadow, and his hand was locked around her raised wrist with the specific, unhurried authority of a man who has never in his life needed to raise his voice, because his presence is the loudest thing in any room. "You will never touch her." 5 words. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. The voice of the Duke of Foxmere carried across that silent lawn with the weight of 800 years of aristocratic authority, and every person present understood that they had just witnessed something that would be discussed in this county for decades. He released Cordelia's wrist. She stumbled backward, cradling her arm as though he had burned her. "Your Grace, you don't understand. She is the Help! She is not. I understand perfectly, Lady Cordelia. He turned his back on her, the most devastating gesture in aristocratic society, the physical statement that a person no longer exists, and he looked at me, at my red, swelling cheek, at my stinging eyes, at my black, shapeless uniform and my dirt-streaked hands and my auburn curls falling loose around my face. He looked at me the way no one had looked at me in 5 years, not through me, not past me, not at my body with contempt or pity, or the careful avoidance of someone who doesn't want to acknowledge that fat women exist. He looked at me as though I was the only person on the lawn, as though I was the reason he had come. "Miss Ashworth," he said, and his voice was gentle now, impossibly gentle, for a man with that much barely contained fury in his jaw. "Are you all right?" "I've had worse," I whispered, which was true, and which broke something in his expression that I don't think will ever fully repair. Sebastian Hale reached into the inside pocket of his navy suit jacket and withdrew a leather document case. He held it with the careful reverence of a man handling something precious and explosive. "I did not come to this garden party for champagne, Lady Cordelia," he said, turning back to face my stepmother. His voice carried effortlessly across the lawn. "And I certainly did not come for your daughter. I came because 6 months ago my family's solicitors were contacted by the executor of Lord Edward Ashworth's estate, the original executor, a man named Mr. Calloway, whom you dismissed and replaced within a week of Edward's death." Cordelia's face went the color of old bone. "Mr. Calloway kept a copy of Lord Edward's original will, the real will, the one Edward drafted with his own solicitor 3 months before his death, not the version you filed with the probate court." Sebastian opened the leather case and removed a document. Even from where I was standing, I could see the familiar, careful handwriting, my father's handwriting, the slanting, bookish script of a man who wrote love letters to his dead wife and bedtime stories for his daughter and kept meticulous records of every rose variety in his wife's garden. "The original will leaves everything to Rosalind Helena Ashworth, the house, the land, the accounts, the rose garden." Sebastian looked at me, and his gray-green eyes were full of something I could not name. "Your father left you everything, Miss Ashworth. Lady Cordelia filed a forged will with the probate court, and she has been occupying your home, spending your inheritance, and keeping you as a servant in your own ancestral house for the past 5 years. The sound that left my body was not a word. It was the structural collapse of 5 years of grief and confusion, and the terrible gnawing question that had kept me awake every night since my father's death. Why did he leave me nothing? Did he not love me? Was I not enough? He loved me. He left me everything. The will was forged. I looked at Cordelia. She was shaking, not with remorse, but with the feral, cornered fury of a predator whose trap has been sprung. "That document is a forgery," Cordelia snarled. "Edward left everything to me. I was his wife. You were his wife for 2 years, Sebastian said quietly. Rosalind was his daughter for her entire life. And the forensic analysis on the filed will confirms it was altered, the signature page was replaced, the witnessing solicitor never existed, and the ink dating is inconsistent with the document's supposed execution date. He paused. "It is fraud, Lady Cordelia, and fraud carries a prison sentence." The garden party had become a courtroom. 112 guests stood on the manicured south lawn of Thornbury Hall and watched Lady Cordelia Ashworth's entire constructed life disintegrate in the summer sunlight. The champagne went flat in their glasses. The string quartet's instruments sat silent on their stands. Even the roses on the tables seemed to lean forward, listening. Cordelia turned to Philippa, her biological daughter, who had been standing near the marquee in her pristine white sundress, watching the catastrophe unfold with the wide, vacant eyes of a woman whose entire existence has been curated by her mother. "Philippa, tell them your stepfather loved me. Tell them I—" "Mother," Philippa said, and her voice was very small, and very tired. Stop. I knew, Philippa whispered. I knew the will was wrong. I heard you on the phone with the solicitor you hired. I was 17. I didn't understand what it meant. She looked at me, at the stepsister she had watched be stripped of her name, her home, her clothes, her dignity, for 5 years without saying a word. I'm sorry, Rosalind. I should have said something. The apology hit me harder than the slap. Because Philippa's silence hadn't been cruelty, it had been cowardice. She had been a child when the forgery happened, and she had grown up inside her mother's machinery, too afraid to speak, too comfortable to act. She was not innocent, but she was not the architect. I looked at Cordelia, the architect. The woman who had married my father, waited for him to die, forged his will, stolen my inheritance, moved me to the servants' quarters, dressed me in black, called me fat every day for 5 years, fed my self-worth to her own ambition, and then, when the Duke of Foxmere accidentally looked at me with something like admiration, had slapped me across the face in front of 100 people to remind me of my place. I could show mercy, let her leave quietly, preserve the family's name, avoid the scandal, handle the forgery privately, through solicitors and sealed court proceedings. Or I could let justice happen, here, now. In front of every person who had watched her hit me and done nothing. I chose. Call the authorities, I said, my voice steady. And someone please bring Lady Cordelia her coat. She's leaving. The authorities arrived within the hour. Cordelia was escorted from Thornbury Hall in handcuffs, still screaming about her rights, about the injustice of it all, about the fat girl who had ruined everything. I didn't watch her leave. I was upstairs, in the attic, where Cordelia had banished everything that had once belonged to my mother. I found the portrait first, Helena Ashworth, painted at 30, plus size and luminous and so beautiful it hurt to look at her. I propped it against the attic wall and knelt before it, pressing my forehead to my mother's painted hand, and I wept. Then I found the trunk. Inside, folded in tissue paper and lavender, were my mother's clothes, the dresses Cordelia had confiscated, not my father's gifts, but older, rarer, Helena's own wardrobe, silks and satins in deep rose, dusty pink, warm gold. The colors of a woman who had dressed her plus-size body not to hide it but to celebrate it. I pulled out a dusty rose silk gown, off the shoulder, fitted at the waist, flowing at the hips, designed to be worn by a woman with my exact body, the wide hips, the full bust, the soft stomach, my mother's body. My body. I took off the black uniform. I let it fall to the attic floor in a puddle of erasure. And I put on my mother's dress. It fit, perfectly, as though Helena had sewn it knowing that one day, decades later, her daughter would need it for exactly this moment. I looked at myself in the dust-streaked attic mirror. My auburn curls were loose around my shoulders. My face was tear-stained and my left cheek was still red from Cordelia's slap. I was plus-size and barefoot and standing in a dusty attic in a dead woman's dress. I was the most beautiful I had ever been in my life. I walked down the grand staircase in my mother's dusty rose gown, barefoot, my dark auburn curls loose and wild around my shoulders. I stepped through the French doors onto the south lawn. The garden party was still gathered. No one had left. They were standing in clusters, speaking in urgent whispers, holding their flat champagne, waiting, though I don't think any of them knew what they were waiting for, until they saw me. The whispers stopped. 112 pairs of eyes turned to me. Some of them were seeing me for the first time, genuinely seeing me, the woman behind the black uniform, the face they had walked past for 5 years without registering. I saw the recognition ripple through them. She looks like Lady Helena. My God, she looks exactly like Helena. I walked across the south lawn toward the rose-laden tables I had set that morning with my own hands. I walked the way my mother would have walked, taking up space, shoulders back, my plus-size body moving through the summer air, with the unhurried confidence of a woman who finally knows she belongs exactly where she is standing. The string quartet, bless them, began to play. Debussy. Clair de Lune. The piece Cordelia had chosen because she thought it was the Duke's favorite. It was actually my mother's favorite. I know, because my father used to hum it in the rose garden while Helena pruned the gallicas. The Duke of Foxmere was waiting at the head table. He stood as I approached. He did not speak. He simply pulled out the chair beside him, the seat of honor, the seat Cordelia had reserved for Philippa, and waited. I sat down. He sat beside me. And the garden party continued with the real Lady Ashworth at the table. The party ended at dusk. The guests drifted away in a haze of champagne and scandal, and the absolute certainty that they had just witnessed the social event of the decade. The staff, my staff now, began clearing the tables. I walked into the walled rose garden. The gallicas were at their peak, deep crimson blooms heavy with evening dew, their fragrance filling the air with the scent of my mother. I heard his footsteps on the gravel. I didn't turn around. "You said you came here looking for me," I said, reaching out to touch a gallica petal. "Why?" Sebastian stood beside me among the roses. In the fading light, his gray-green eyes were the color of old silver. "Because my father told me before he died that his friend Edward Ashworth had a daughter with her mother's roses and her father's mind, and a body that the world would try to make her ashamed of." He paused. He said, "Find her, Sebastian, because if Cordelia has done what I think she's done, that girl is alone in her own house, and she has no idea what she's worth." "I spent 6 months investigating the will before I came here," Sebastian continued. "I could have sent solicitors. I could have had it handled at a distance, but I wanted to meet you. I wanted to see the woman who tended her mother's roses through 5 years of cruelty and never let a single one of them die." He turned to face me fully, and then I walked into this garden and found you on your knees in the soil, with dirt on your hands and roses blooming around you, and you looked up at me with your mother's face and your father's fire, and I understood why my father was so insistent. "Why?" I whispered. "Because I was always going to fall in love with you, Rosalind, from the moment you looked up at me from the soil and told me I knew my roses. You were in a servant's uniform, and you had dirt on your cheek, and you were the most beautiful woman I have ever seen, and I need you to know that I don't say that despite your body. I say it because of everything you are, every curve and every scar, and every year you survived in this house." He took my dirt-stained, plump hand in his large, aristocratic one. "This is not a rescue. You have already rescued yourself. You survived 5 years, you tended these roses, and the moment the truth was offered, you stood in your own name and claimed your home. You don't need me for that." He lifted my hand and pressed his lips to my knuckles. "But I would very much like to spend the rest of my life standing beside you while you do it." "You want to marry a plus-size gardener with soil under her nails and a house full of scandal?" I said, my voice breaking on a laugh that was half a sob. "I want to marry Lady Rosalind Helena Ashworth," he said, "who is the most formidable woman in England, and who looks exactly like the roses her mother planted." 1 year later, my mother's portrait hangs in the main hall of Thornbury Hall again. It is the first thing you see when you walk through the front doors. Lady Helena Ashworth, plus-size and luminous and smiling down at you with the warm, unapologetic beauty of a woman who never once apologized for the space she occupied. Beside it, freshly commissioned, hangs a new portrait. Me, Rosalind Helena Ashworth Hale, Duchess of Foxmere. Painted in the rose garden, wearing a deep rose gown, my dark auburn curls loose around my shoulders, my hands resting on the blooms my mother planted. The painter captured the exact moment I laughed. head tilted back, throat open, every curve of my plus-size body visible and celebrated in the warm, golden light. Cordelia was charged with fraud, forgery, and financial abuse. She is awaiting trial. Philippa testified for the prosecution. We do not speak, but she sent me a letter. 3 pages, handwritten, the first honest thing she has ever produced, and I have kept it. The black uniforms were burned, every single one, in a bonfire in the south garden, while Sebastian stood beside me and handed me the matches. I tend my mother's roses every morning, but now I tend them in beautiful clothes, silks in deep rose and warm gold, and the rich, living colors of a woman who is done being invisible. I tend them barefoot, with soil on my hands, and if guests arrive early and find the Duchess of Foxmere on her knees among the Gallicas, they know better than to mistake me for the help. Sebastian watches me from the library window every morning while I garden. He thinks I don't notice. I notice everything. I am my father's daughter. We were married in the rose garden, in September, when the Gallicas were at their deepest crimson. I wore my mother's dress, altered only slightly, let out at the bust, because my body is my own and it answers to no one's expectations. Sebastian wore a gray morning suit and cried when he saw me, which I will hold over him for the rest of our lives. I am 33 years old, I am plus size, I am the Duchess of Foxmere. And I tend my mother's roses every single morning, in the garden of the house that was always mine, wearing the colors of the woman who taught me that beauty is not a size, it is a refusal to disappear. If your stepmother had stolen your inheritance, dressed you in black, called you fat every day for 5 years, and then slapped you across the face in front of 100 guests, would you have shown mercy and let her leave quietly, or would you have demanded justice right there on the lawn, in front of every person who watched her hit you and did nothing? Comment mercy or justice below. Subscribe for a new emotional story every week. Hit the bell so you never miss the next one.